Welcome back to the Dershow. President Trump continues to push every envelope in every possible direction. One of my favorite stories was yesterday at the end of the day, there was a story in the media that President Trump hadn't had a press conference or press availability on that day. My God, that becomes a story that Trump didn't have press accessibility for one day. Imagine if that story had been applied to President Biden or really any other previous presidents. Biden would go months without having any access to the press. But one day goes by. Now, I don't know whether or not Trump spoke today. I haven't been busy. I've been really busy. But to have one day go by or even 2 days go by, President Trump's just been doing everything. You can like it, you can hate it, but you have to admit that every day he does something. He just pushes the envelope. He pushes it on tariffs. Obviously, we're in a tariff war with Canada. I don't understand why. They're our friends and our neighbors. Trump's probably going to end up getting the Liberal Party candidate elected, who had no chance of being elected 2 or 3 months ago, but now the Liberal Party candidate, this guy Carney, is saying, hey, I'm the anti-Trump candidate, and my opponent, the conservative, he is a Trump guy. So, of course, Canadians are going to vote against Trump, and so they're going to vote against Trump's candidate. What's going on in Gaza? President said, unless the hostages are released, they'll be held to pay. And, Israel is making them pay, cutting off electricity. By the way, has anybody ever heard of a country that provided electricity to enemies that are trying to kill it? This is the most remarkable state of war. You have Hamas attacking Israeli civilians, killing 1,200 of them, hijacking and taking, hostages of 250 of them, murdering, raping, etc. And the complaint is, but Israel's cutting back on electricity and cutting back on food. First of all, Gaza has been crying wolf for years. If you believed everything the Gaza health authorities have said, everybody in Gaza would have been dead 6 months ago from starvation. We don't know of a single case of starvation. There are food stalls. You see them on television. You can get them on Google. They are selling fresh fruits and vegetables and hummus and everything. Nobody is starving. Yeah, they're missing dessert. And they can't watch television as often as they'd like to. But Gazans can produce their own electricity. You ever hear of solar panels? You can get those. There are plenty of them in Gaza. So, is Israel being smart by cutting off some food and some electricity? I leave that to others. Are they acting lawfully? Well, no other country in the world has ever provided this kind of assistance to its enemies, particularly if you provided oil. It's going to be turned into rocket fuel. We know that. We know that every humanitarian bit of aid that was given to Gaza over the years has been used against Israeli civilians. And so, we're in that situation. But President Trump's pushing the envelope. He's pressing it in every possible way, and that gives rise to condemnation and to support. People, I think, it'd be interesting to know what would happen if there were an election today with the stock market down, with some problems with the economy, but with the most energetic president we've seen in years and years. Whether he would still win the popular vote today, I don't know the answer to that question. I think if the stock market decline continues for a long period of time and begins to have impact not only on Wall Street but on Main Street, we're going to see that. As I said the other day, it serves as a kind of check and balance outside of the standard checks and balances that we have. Reality is a check. If you do things and they hurt the average person, that's a check on your electoral fortunes and the electoral fortunes of your party. All right, now I want to turn to the topic of the day, and it involves this horrible guy named Mahmoud Khalil. He was the leader of the pro-Hamas encampment at Columbia. Whether he was personally responsible or just ideologically responsible for the blocking of access to Jewish students to classes, to occupying, Hamilton Hall and other places, to disrupting classes. And he was, the negotiator, the front man. He took his mask off, so we saw who he was, and now he's been arrested, and he's been swooped down to Louisiana. Why? Obviously, to avoid a liberal judge in New York, already one liberal judge in New York, his name was Furman or something, ruled that he couldn't be taken out of the country. He couldn't be deported, subject to judicial resolution, but he can be taken to other parts of the country and held there. And we'll see where the judicial decision takes place. Will it take place in New York, where he'd get a much more sympathetic judge, or will it take place in Louisiana, where he'd probably get a less sympathetic judge? Don't know the answer to that question. Depends a little bit on, where his lawyer wants to bring the case, whether the United States government decides to bring the case. But it's not a slam dunk as to whether he committed deportable misconduct. He is a green card holder. If he was just a visa holder, just snap your finger, he's out of here. You can revoke a visa almost without any due process at all. But you can't revoke a green card. A green card gives you status. He's been in the United States as a permanent resident for a number of years, married to an American citizen who's 8 months pregnant. That makes the case somewhat more sympathetic. But the point I want to make is this. All right, I want to compare this to the infamous case of Skokie, Illinois. I was involved in that case. I was on the national board of the American Civil Liberties Union. And let's go back in time, in 1977, and remember what happened in Skokie. A bunch of Nazis, without a doubt, they were wearing Nazi uniforms, they were wearing swastikas, Heil Hitler salutes. They picked a place to have a march and a demonstration. It was a peaceful demonstration, just a march, but it's a place where many Jewish Holocaust survivors in the outskirts of Chicago, Skokie, Illinois, lived. And they deliberately picked it to provoke. And they were, essentially by marching, they weren't saying very much, but they were either denying the Holocaust or calling for it to be repeated. It was deeply offensive to the citizens of Skokie, many of whom were Holocaust survivors. And so the town of Skokie banned them. The Nazis then called the American Civil Liberties Union, and we had meetings and votes and everything, and decided to defend the rights of the Nazis to march through Skokie. It wasn't so much defending the Nazis, it was opposing the power of Skokie to ban, to censor what was pure speech. There's no doubt it was pure speech. They weren't wearing masks, they weren't threatening anybody deliberately. They were just showing their presence as Nazis, and it was pretty awful. I mean, obviously, a lot of these old people had lost relatives in the Holocaust, and to see young men with swastikas on their arms and Nazi flags marching through would be psychologically traumatic, but constitutionally protected. So I was very much on the side of defending the rights of Nazis. I'll never forget my mother called. My mother goes, "Are you defending Nazis?" I said, "Mama, I'm not defending Nazis. I'm opposing censorship." "Oh, I'm your mother. Don't talk to me that way. Whose side are you on, the Jews or the Nazis?" I said, "I'm on the side of the Constitution." No. That's not good enough. You have to pick sides. Are you on the sides of the Jews or the sides of the Nazis? My mother was furious at me because she thought I was on the side of the Nazis. Of course, my hope and prayer would be as soon as they left the demonstration in Skokie, they'd walk out on a highway and get hit by a bus and killed. I would shed no tears if that had happened. But I did shed tears for the First Amendment. I was worried about the First Amendment. But let me tell you what happened when we voted to support the rights of the Nazis marching through Skokie. Half the ACLU quit. People quit like mad. Thousands of members quit. Tens of thousands of dollars in contributions were cut off. People were furious. I don't remember anybody defending what the Nazis said or glorifying the Nazis. Everybody hated the Nazis. Everybody wished they would die. But their First Amendment rights were being violated. So let's compare that to how the world is reacting to this guy, Mahmoud Khalidi. Not only only is the ACLU defending them, saying it's the greatest violation of civil liberties over the past 50 years. Nonsense. That isn't the case. It's not even a clear First Amendment case. Obviously, what he did was actions. He was, leading occupation and encampments, and whether he personally blocked access, I don't know, but he was leading a campaign that included blocking access. It wasn't a pure First Amendment case like the Nazi case, but nonetheless, I can see the ACLU defending his right. But that's not all that happened. What we're seeing is hundreds of thousands of students and faculty and others glorifying this horrible person. Remember, this is a person who supported the Al-Aqsa flood. Now, what's the Al-Aqsa flood? It's the name given by Hamas to the beheading of babies, to the burning of people alive, to raping women. And you have this guy glorifying that, leading demonstrations that call for intifada, which means a repetition of this, which calls for, we'll do October 7th over and over and over and over again. We'll block access. We'll intimidate Jewish students. So it's a hard case. It's not a clear case on the First Amendment. But let's put that aside for a moment. Let's assume that the First Amendment supports what he said. But should anybody be glorifying this thug? Should anybody be supporting what he said? Of course not. And yet we're seeing that. We're seeing that in the media. We're seeing that among college students. We're seeing it among faculty. He is being made a martyr and a hero. The Nazis weren't made martyrs or heroes. They were condemned across the board. So I wonder why we don't have the same attitude toward Khalidi as we had toward the Nazis. I do. I think they're both beneath contempt. I think they're despicable. I think they engaged in horrible hate speech and speech that may have advocated and encouraged violence, but covered, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever your point of view, by the First Amendment. First Amendment permits any speech except speech that incites to immediate violence. So as you can't stand in front of a crowd and say, attack this man now, attack him now. That's incitement to violence, to immediate violence. That's the Brandenburg principle. But if you just give a rational speech saying, Jews, they don't really deserve to live. Why don't we just build some more ovens and gas chambers like they had in Germany and solve the Jewish problem? That's actually protected speech. You can say that in America. You might not agree that it should be said, but you can't agree with my constitutional analysis. You can say that in America. By the way, you can also say that blacks should be lynched. I think it would be a good idea if we taught blacks a lesson and had a few more lynches. You can say that. That's constitutionally protected. You can say that women who support abortion, should be raped. You can say that. That's all it's horrible, 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 despicable. You can say it. You can say it. What you can't say is calling on somebody to do it and do it immediately and do it now. Lynch him, lynch him, lynch. No, you can't do that. Rape? No, you can't do that. You can't do what happened in Rhode Island. Remember when in the Jodie Foster movie, when people were holding down a rape victim and others were screaming, raper, raper, raper. No, that's incitement to violence. But nobody's really talking about incitement to violence in these cases. We're talking about advocacy of violence, justifying violence, glorifying violence. And so for me, the question that I find incomprehensible is, and it takes an analogy. Let's assume the following. I'm a law professor. I'm entitled to use analogies. Let's assume that there was a green card holder. Instead of his name being Khalidi, let's assume his name, was Smith. And he was a white Klansman. And he started a Klan club at Columbia. And he led demonstrators wearing sheets over their face, masks. And he advocated. He said, it's really too bad. We haven't had lynchings in a long time. It would really put black people in their place using the N-word, which is also constitutionally protected. But rapes, it's a weapon of war. We should be using more rapes, more. Let's assume that it happened. Two questions. Would the ACLU have come in and defended him? The old ACLU, my ACLU, Nadine Strassen's ACLU, yes, we would have defended him. This ACLU, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think this ACLU would have gone near a guy who was a Klansman, who was advocating horrible things against Black people or gay people or women. I don't believe that. But let's assume I'm wrong. Let's assume for a second they would defend him. They'd go to court and defend him. They would be spending half of their time attacking him on the merits, saying what he's saying is horrible, what he's saying is despicable. They're not saying that about Khalid. They're not saying it. And the people who signed the petition aren't saying it. Many of them are glorifying him. Many of them are agreeing with his statements. That's not the civil liberties approach. That's easy. If you agree with Khalidi, then you're a Hamas supporter and you're a despicable human being. And if you get hit by a car, I'm not going to shed any tears. Okay, but why are we treating Khalidi differently from the way we treated the Nazis? I don't think we should be. I think we should treat Khalidi exactly the same way as we would treat a Klansman or treat a Nazi, or the way we did treat the Nazis. We don't have to do a hypothetical for that. We know that there wasn't a single member of the ACLU who defended the Nazis on the merits of what they were saying. No, but there are members of the ACLU who are defending Khalidi on the merits of what he's saying and what he's done and what he's going to do if he's allowed to remain in the country. We have a double standard, and the double standard is clearly against Jews, Zionists, Israel, patriotic Americans, religious Christians, and I don't think the ACLU would be defending any of those people in comparable situations. I think the ACLU has become the Anti-Civil Liberties Union. It has become an organization that defends the left. Once every few years, they'll defend some obscure Nazi just to be able to go on television and say, see, we don't apply a double standard. We defend this one Nazi. But would you defend somebody who came to Columbia and tried to stir up opposition to Blacks on campus or women on campus or abortion centers or other kinds of things? No, I don't think the ACLU would do it. But even if the ACLU would do it, I guarantee you, with 100% certainty, you would not get hundreds of thousands of people signing a petition in his favor, and you wouldn't get anybody defending what the Klansmen said or what the Nazis said on the merits. So my complaint here is not a legal one. It's not about the court of law. Court of law, you can argue maybe it's right for the ACLU to be defending him in the court of law. My argument is about the court of public opinion. My argument is about the morality of what he is saying. What he is saying is immoral. It's hate speech. It's horrible. It's just like the Nazis, just like the Klan. And anybody who treats it differently, anybody who says, no, what he's calling for is just the end of genocide. But that's nonsense. That's not what they were calling for. They weren't calling for a two-state solution. They weren't calling for a ceasefire. That's not what they were calling for. That's what the media may say they were calling for, but I saw it with my own eyes. They were calling for the end of Israel. They were calling for a continuation of the Intifada against Israel. They were calling for a repeat of the Al-Aqsa Storm, which is the rape, murder, killing of innocent Jewish babies and women and children. That's what they were calling for. And I want to see the evidence come out. I suspect there are three categories of evidence, and we'll see it play out in this case. If he had, in fact, committed a crime of moral turpitude, then he's deportable, and I would support his deportation. I don't think they're going to be able to prove that. First of all, there's been no conviction, so there'd have to be a trial. It'd have to be a prosecution. So I think that's off the table. Second, free speech, just getting up there and holding up a placard or saying, I believe Israel is guilty of genocide. I don't think that's this case either. This case is somewhere in the middle. This case involves action, occupation, trespassing, blocking of access, wearing masks, intimidating students. Now, what direct responsibility Khalid has for each of those things will be determined by the evidence. So we have to wait and see what evidence the government produces. Now, there's a lawsuit, a civil lawsuit now pending against Colombia, and they've done discovery. So I suspect that we're going to see some evidence coming out about Khalidi, and if he just engaged in free speech, hey, okay, I'll defend his right of free speech while attacking the merits of his free speech. But where the case is probably going to come down is he went way beyond the free speech, went way beyond the First Amendment, but he may not have committed crimes of moral turpitude. So it'll fit somewhere uncomfortably, and the statute will have to be invoked that is very vague and broad about the national security interests of the United States, and that will raise some serious constitutional questions. So this case is not over. This case will go up to the Supreme Court, I think, unless the evidence clearly shows that there's no First Amendment rights involved here at all, and probably we'll see some pretty important decisions. Who renders those decisions, whether it'll initially be a judge in Louisiana, whether it'll be a judge in New York, that judge in New York, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. There's going to be plenty of judge shopping and forum shopping. But the one thing I'm absolutely certain of is no one should condone what this SOB said, what this racist said, what this monster said, what this Jew hater said. What he said and what he did was absolutely and utterly despicable. But hey, First Amendment defends despicable acts and despicable people, but you don't have to support them. You don't have to admire them. You don't have to lionize them. You don't have to make heroes out of them. Treat them as the Nazis that they are. Okay, let's look at some letters. I have letters about this. Here's the first one. Hopefully you don't get a phone call from Khalil from a Louisiana area code. I hope not, but if I do, I'll take the call, and I will obviously talk about it with him. Here, next question about that. If the green card holder did not himself physically block anyone or instruct anyone to do so, and the government targets him because of his views, however odious, is that not a free speech violation? The answer to that is yes, it is. Being part of a process of intimidation sounds vague. As I understand it, incitement requires direct and specific mob action, not just making a person or persons feel intimidated. You're absolutely right. And that's why this may become a case in which the First Amendment becomes the operative criteria. I mentioned crimes of moral turpitude. So one of the letters misunderstood that, and he writes me as follows. When is the last time someone was convicted and punished for moral turpitude? No. You're not punished for moral turpitude. You're punished for the crime. Let's assume the crime is blocking access to students based on their religion to go to classes. That's the crime. Then the court has to decide, is it a crime of moral turpitude? Obviously, if a person commits rape or robbery, that's a crime of moral turpitude. If there are cases that say if you are involved in DUI, drunken driving, driving while under the influence, that isn't a case of moral turpitude, and you can't be deported. So these cases are gray area, but it's not the crime of moral turpitude. It's conviction of a crime that can be described by a court as a crime involving moral turpitude. That phrase is used in a number of contexts, a number of criteria. For example, in Israel, if you're convicted of a crime of moral turpitude, you can't run for president or prime minister. And so that's one of the issues, is whether or not the crimes that Netanyahu has been accused of are crimes of moral turpitude. Okay, here's one. Now that Mr. Pompeo is running Colombia, things will smooth out significantly. I wish he were running Colombia. He's not. He's just a visiting something or other teacher. He's a very, very smart guy. He learned from the best. He was my student back in the day when he finished serving in the armed forces. So, but he's not going to run Colombia. He's probably going to commute there and teach a day a week. I'm not sure, but be interesting because I'll be talking to him, and I'd like to find out what he thinks of the Columbia students, the Columbia faculty, assuming he's going to have any interaction with the Columbia faculty. I doubt that many of the faculty will want to even say hello to him or shake his hand because he was the Secretary of State under Trump. He's not in this administration, and that was a deliberate decision made by President Trump. Okay, the viewers may boo me, but I clap for Professor Dershowitz's interpretation that permitted claps demand permitted boos. Also, in all humility, while I am a horrible speller, I cannot rightly raise myself above the ranking of the distinguished Professor Dershowitz. I must demur and rank myself as the world's third worst speller. And then actually somebody said there isn't a diagnosis for people who are pretty smart but can't spell. So I don't know whether I fit that diagnosis or not. During the anti-Israel demonstrations, I saw graffiti, "Protest is not supposed to be convenient." The same is true of civil disobedience. I'm reading from the letter. Prosecution or deportation is a natural consequence of one's decision to break the law to parade one's principles. To deliberately commit the crime, then whine about the consequences, is to grossly misunderstand the nature of civil disobedience. At your trial or hearing, you should be allowed to claim necessity, but good luck with that. No, you're right. If you are claiming to be acting as a civil disobedient, you ought to be taking the consequences. Martin Luther King went to jail because he knew he had violated the law. He deliberately violated the law in order to confront the injustice of the law. I commend that. I admire that. If you are willing to accept the consequences, you can also challenge the law on constitutional grounds, which is what Martin Luther King did, and some others did as well. All right. Your rights end when you impede others' freedom. Well, that, of course, is the mantra of great civil libertarian John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill, basically, and I've summarized John Stuart Mill in a quip. I hope you won't mind my quip. John Stuart Mill says, you can't be compelled to do anything that just helps yourself, but you can be compelled to do things that, if you don't do them, will hurt others. So I always summarize them as saying, you have the right to inhale, but not to exhale. On me. You can inhale, destroying your own lungs. That's your decision. If you're an adult, you can inhale, but you can't exhale in my presence. In fact, interesting, today I went and had a cup of tea on Lincoln Road, and when I came back from the tea, there was a woman sitting at my table outside, and she was smoking away. And I was a little upset. I don't like to get smoke. She has no right to exhale. But she came up to me and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Should I change my seat?" And she then moved kind of a little while away and blew smoke in the other direction. So she satisfied the standards of John Stuart Mill and made me happy. So that was fine. Somebody points out that an Israeli professor at Columbia, Shai Davidai, was suspended months ago and denied access to his personal intellectual belongings and research from his office. Any Hamas-loving professors get that treatment there? Well, I would ask a slightly different question. When he was basically suspended for exercising his free speech rights, did we get any petitions? Did the ACLU jump in? Has the ACLU ever spoken out on behalf of Jewish kids who were denied their right of free speech? Or is the ACLU just a biased, partisan, hard left, anti-Israel organization? I think the question answers itself. And then the final comment was about something I said a few days ago. Thanks for clarifying the flag issue and burning of the flag. Remember what I said, and it has effect on some of the things we're talking about today. You have the right to buy a flag, your own flag, and you have a right to go in a public place where fire is permitted. You can't go to a place where fire is, and you have a right to light that flag on fire as a sign of opposition to the United States. You also have a right to trample on the flag. I quoted once Justice Brennan, who said he ever saw somebody doing that, he would defend his right to do it, and then he'd punch him in the mouth. That's my attitude, too. I can never imagine myself doing anything but respecting the flag of the United States of America, the flag of Israel, and the flag of other democracies. But you have a constitutional right to burn your own flag. You can't burn somebody else's flag, and you can't violate laws that say no fires in this national park. It has to be content neutral. but there can't be a law that says you can salute the flag, but you can't burn it, which gets back to the very disputed proposition that I put forward the day after President Trump's State of the Non-State of the Non-Union speech. My view is that if you can clap, you can boo for the same amount of time that you can clap, or you can show opposition, or you can pass a rule in Congress saying you're allowed to put up a sign that says clap and you're allowed to put up a sign that says boo, but you can't just allow people to put up a sign that shows support of the speaker's statement and prohibit signs or statements that are moderate and without an intention to quiet anybody down, that shows lack of support. So that's my view. I think it's a minority view. It's certainly a minority view among my viewers. See you tomorrow.